Hi, I'm Kieren.
I'm Riku.
Welcome to Artificially Ever After, where today we're going to be talking about
ChatGPT,
the good, the bad, and
the ugly.
yeah, welcome back. Sorry we've been away for a bit of time.
Yeah, thanks for tuning back in.
Yeah, we've both been out of the country for a little bit, haven't we, Riku?
Yeah, I was doing a bit of backpacking in India.
Nice. I was sailing. I was living a bit more luxuriously than Riku, but yeah, we're back now and ready to start reeling out some episodes again.
So, what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, so we're just following on from our previous episode where we explained how ChatGPT is working, and I think we just wanted to cover some of the ways that people are using ChatGPT and some of the kind of implications of that.
Yeah, and we kind of wanted to break it down into the good, the bad, and we say the ugly. What do you think we mean by that?
I don't know, maybe that will kind of figure itself out along the way, but I think we just merge bad and ugly together for now. But yeah, splitting it into kind of the good and the bad sides of ChatGPT.
Yeah, so we'll start off with the good, and then we'll move on to the bad in the second half.
So yeah, I think it's just really important to talk about some of these points, especially the scale at which ChatGPT is now being used to kind of make people aware of its kind of good and bad sides. I saw this figure that was, as of June 2023, there were 200 million monthly users. So that is a lot of people going to this site and using this tool. So yeah, I think it's really important to talk about this stuff.
Wow, yeah, and we've got some kind of case studies to talk about between students that are using it, professionals, companies.
Yeah, I think, with all of those use cases now, there's starting to be some studies that are coming out. People are starting to look into how people are using it, some of the kind of implications on education and medicine. So it's quite interesting to see what's now coming out. I mean, I think we mentioned this to each other recently, that it's still less than a year that ChatGPT has been out, which is crazy to think that all of this stuff is happening in such a short period of time. So yeah, let's delve into it a bit.
That's crazy. I can't believe it's not even been a year. So we've got some statistics, like around 29% of ChatGPT prompts are related to programming. We have education covering about 10% of all use cases. Mm-hmm. But we also have some other use cases like writing assistants, content creation, and creative idea generation.
Yeah.
Do you want to quickly talk about the most common words used?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting one. There was a study that was done and it looked into the most common words that come up in people's prompts. And I think that is like a really good way at hinting to what people are actually using it for. So just to reel them off there, kind of listing the top 10, starting with write, create, list, fun, explain, date, English, design, case, which is a strange one, and video. So some of those there kind of indicate an educational explanation, kind of researchy thing. Research was actually the 11th top word, so I didn't include that there, but that was the next one that would have come on the list. So yeah, all of these kind of hinting at some education or research based
Can confirm
questions.
I am part of the research statistic.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. I think another really interesting one was just looking at how many prompts people are actually asking it in a session, which is quite interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a pretty even split, actually. So a third of people were going on to just ask it a single question. And I think the fact that there's now an app helps a lot with that, so that people can just quickly get out their phone and rather than Googling stuff, they quickly go on the ChatGPT app to ask a single question. And then another third of people are asking it between 2 and 4 prompts in a session. And then the final third is people asking it over 5 prompts. So I think I would definitely fall into that category where you're kind of having this back and forth dialogue where you're kind of discussing a topic or asking it questions after question. So it's quite interesting to see how many questions and prompts people are asking it in a session.
So it's like the best friend category on the last one there.
Yeah, where you're chatting to it for half the day or something, yeah.
I was going to say, on the 5th most common word, date, what was it, number 6? Like, do you think that's like...
Yeah, numerical date or...
yeah, planning a date.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes, as we just mentioned, a lot of the prompts are related to programming. So you can imagine there's kind of maybe a big increase in productivity after using ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had a little look around and found this really good paper by MIT, and which was published in March 2023, so it's fairly recent. And they had a big pool of participants, about 444 college-educated professionals. So they asked the participants to do tasks like writing press releases, short reports, analysis plans, delicate emails, and These are about 20 to 30-minute assignments, so pretty full-on tasks.
So a lot of writing stuff, no coding in there. So
No coding, yeah. This was so the main findings, just want to highlight to you guys, is that the time taken to complete these tasks dropped by about 30%. So using GPT for these tasks made people much faster. And interestingly, it also increased the quality output by about 15%. And the way they did these evaluations were by using 3 human evaluators, and they weren't shown which participants were using GPT for the answers they were reading.
Got you, okay.
So that's a little breakdown for some numbers on how GPT might be able to help you with your job if you're doing those kind of things.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have started using it within the workplace, haven't they? It seems that way, especially in computer programming, like you see in those figures, and people in writing, if that's kind of in journalism and stuff. So I think people are starting to use it to help with their work, which is why the OpenAI have now released a service called GPT Enterprise, which is specifically aimed towards companies, because a lot of companies had a reluctance, I think, in the early days of using ChatGPT within the workplace because of privacy concerns. So they were very reluctant to give their private company data to this tool on the website because it was being used to train and improve the models and was therefore accessible to OpenAI. So I think a lot of companies, mainly bigger companies, I think, were kind of preventing their employees from using ChatGPT. But now, I think OpenAI saw a big potential there. So they have started GPT Enterprise, where companies can use a kind of private version of ChatGPT where they can upload all of their data, super encrypted, and it doesn't go into training the model. So you could see that in the future, we're already getting there now, where you kind of have companies that have their own sort of version of ChatGPT that has access to all of their company data, and employees can go and kind of communicate with it and query it with things related to company-specific information, which, you can only imagine what that could do for sort of productivity, having a tool that knows everything there is about the company at that present moment in time and historically. Like, there are probably very few employees in a lot of companies that have that wealth of knowledge. So I'm sure that will kind of skyrocket productivity in a lot of companies.
Yeah, the fact that GPT Enterprise exists just highlights that there is a market for
exactly
the gains.
And I saw as well that they're kind of giving completely uncapped access, where there's kind of no restriction on the number of prompts you can give it, which there is a kind of cap for just an individual user going to the free version. You can only kind of prompt it so much, whereas this enterprise stuff is completely uncapped. So I think they are actually now prioritizing companies because there's so much potential there.
So it sounds like gains in productivity for everyone. So besides this study, there's also just been some pretty general exams that people tested GPT with, right?
Yeah, so also within the sort of education setting, I think OpenAI initially tested GPT on some well-known exams just to see how it would perform. One of which was the bar exam, so the exam that lawyers have to pass. And ChatGPT using GPT-4 scored in the 90th percentile, so it was able to score 298 out of a possible 400 points on the American bar exam.
Wow, so it's absolutely smashed it, because
I
think the threshold to pass varies state to state, but we've got in New York you need just the 50th percentile to pass. So
this is it's better than 90% of people. So it's passing that exam very easily, very comfortably. And then there are some other exams as well that it was able to pass. So the MBA business examinations, US medical licensing exam. So these kind of vastly different exams that are testing different facts and different bits of knowledge, it was able to pass all of them. But quite an interesting one, which I've heard mentioned a few times, is AP biology. So the advanced placement exams. So they're exams taken by high school students to place them within colleges. And AP Biology is one specifically that's designed to test critical thinking skills. So it's not simply fact regurgitation, which is quite an interesting one, that if it was simply just quoting facts from a textbook, maybe it wouldn't be so surprising considering it's been trained to predict the next word. But the exam is designed to trip people up and test their actual understanding of the information rather than just the factual regurgitation.
Wow, that is pretty impressive stuff.
So you could imagine people studying for these exams could be a super useful tool to help them study and kind of query GPT in that kind of revision process. So one thing which people speak a lot about, which GPT is great at, and one of the positive aspects of these generative AI tools, is the democratization of information. So previously, if you had people from kind of different schools, different backgrounds, their kind of access to this information might have some differences. GPT kind of levels the playing field here. So everyone that has access to the internet has access to these resources and can now learn at the same level and get the assistance that maybe you could only get previously from a sort of private tutor or something. One of the other areas which we can now get into with democratization of information is with healthcare and medical information.
Yeah, and we didn't have to search very hard to find a good example of how GPT and the democratization of its knowledge has been really useful, right?
Yeah, well, someone's already done a pretty cool study on using ChatGPT as a healthcare chatbot, so to help diagnose some medical-related symptoms that you may have. So what they did, they went to this forum on Reddit called Ask Doctors, where people can go online and they basically submit their symptoms, their problems, and doctors, physicians can go to this forum and they go through the questions and try to respond to people and help diagnose their symptoms. So they took information from this forum and they specifically took the questions from patients and gave them to ChatGPT instead. And then they had a panel of healthcare experts who looked at the responses from doctors, from physicians, and compared those to the responses from ChatGPT without knowing which one was from who, and ranked them. So what was really interesting was that was some of the evaluation metrics. So the evaluators actually preferred the chatbot responses to physician responses in 78% of cases. Wow. So there were 585 evaluations of kind of different responses here. And what was found was that physicians' responses were significantly shorter on average. Now, that's kind of to be expected there because I think, physicians, when they go on these websites, they will probably not just respond to one question at a time. They're probably going through, when they have, a bit of spare time on their lunch break or whatever, probably going through and trying to answer as many of these as possible. So that's probably not too surprising. But they actually found that the chatbot responses are actually more empathetic, which again, might tie into the fact that doctors probably have very limited free time to go and do this stuff. But it's really interesting to kind of see them as a tool that can aid and assist doctors, maybe in kind of communicating or passing this information on to patients.
Yeah, just kind of like making the doctors a bit more, emotionally aware, which is kind of interesting. We wouldn't really think AI can do that, right?
Yes.
Actually, yeah, on a little side note, we actually found, because I did like a really small interview study with like GPT users, and like I think we interviewed it was only like 15 people, but I think it was over 60% of them like used GPT as a therapist.
Wow, yeah, I think that's
kind of shows its ability to.
Yeah, hopefully it's actually going to have a fairly positive influence on mental health as long as it's kind of factually accurate and we can kind of trust the reliability of its responses. You could kind of see it as this kind of non-judgmental like venting platform where people can go, because it's not a human that they're talking to, maybe people could be slightly more inclined to divulge some information that they wouldn't just give to their friends or a human. So maybe it could be great for that.
Yeah, I've definitely asked GPT some things that I think I'd be quite embarrassed to ask a human.
That you wouldn't share on the podcast?
Yeah. So we've just covered some pretty maybe expected uses of ChatGPT. But we also came across some really kind of strange things. Kieren, do you want to quickly...
Yeah, well, I think some of the stuff we've just been mentioning and a lot of the current uses maybe make a lot of sense when you kind of understand how it's been trained, the data that's gone into it, and this kind of next word prediction like we spoke about last time. However, what's been really interesting that we've started to see through GPT 3.5 and especially in GPT 4 are these kind of emergent abilities and this kind of behavior that isn't necessarily expected from just looking at a lot of language and kind of predicting the next word. So
what would you say emergence is?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one to define, but luckily some researchers have put a lot of time into thinking about this and have summarized it quite nicely, so I don't have to. But yeah, emergent behavior is a tricky one, but what these researchers concluded was that they considered an ability to be emergent if it's not present in smaller versions of the model, but then it's present in a larger version. So it's kind of something that springs out of just scaling up these models, and it's not something that you can simply predict by kind of extrapolating the performance of what it can currently do and then say, oh, well, when you scale the model up, it'll just get better at these specific tasks. These are tasks that start to appear and things that the model can now do that it previously wasn't able to do.
So are these kind of emergent things, you say spring out, so it just suddenly gets the ability to do certain things?
Yeah, well, whether that's kind of, it getting better at lots of different abilities that then kind of culminate and it's then able to perform tasks that it may not have been able to do before, or it's a completely new kind of aspect of the model that's emerged from scaling it up that allows it to do things in a completely new way. I think this is currently up for debate, and even this kind of research paper doesn't conclude what they think. They hypothesize about both sides, but yeah, these emergent abilities are quite apparent in GPT-4. So do you have some examples of some of them?
I mean, there was a weird one that I came across, which was helping you pronounce words. So
yeah,
it would kind of, if you write the word and how do you pronounce espresso, it will kind of explain it in a way that at least the Western tongue would copy kind of how it says to pronounce it.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting because it's breaking barrier between the written text and the spoken text.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's pronouncing things or describing the pronunciation in a way that's maybe not been done before or isn't just kind of very apparent on the internet. I think I've had some examples where I've kind of searched how to pronounce a word, and it kind of gives you the sort of phonetic language of how to pronounce it. But then GPT is able to give you this kind of very easy to understand description. So in the case of espresso, I think it replied and it spelt out EH with a hyphen and then all caps spre and then another hyphen and so it's splits it up into those kind of different parts of the word that make it really easy to roll off the tongue.
I mean, we came across this strange one about mapping out a house. Do you want to quickly cover that?
So yeah, there was this other paper where they were kind of testing the abilities of GPT-4 and trying loads of sort of different tasks which may not seem intuitive to a language model. And one of them was that they basically described the layout of a house to ChatGPT in the prompt, and then they hid treasure around the map. So they basically created a treasure map. And they described all of this just in language. And they were able to get ChatGPT, using GPT-4, to reconstruct a map of that house and actually write the code to draw the map.
Wow, so there's kind of two parts to this. And I was actually chatting to my friend about this the other day. He's a bit of a GPT guru.
Oh, yeah.
I was saying, well, maybe the first half is kind of, there's some intuition there. I mean, initially it sounds like GPT has this kind of like spatial memory, but I think what it's doing is just summarizing the text that the humans are giving it as it explores this hypothetical house. But that part about generating the code to plot the correct spatial description I don't know how that works.
It's pretty crazy. I think what we're seeing across lots of different applications here, and I think the idea of this emergent behavior is that through the kind of scaling up of this model and now at the size of GPT-4, reading as much text and language as it has done, the model seems to kind of have inferred some like logic and reasoning abilities from reading all that text. So rather than simply just predicting the most statistically likely next word, it seems to have discovered some kind of patterns within language that allow it to take kind of certain reasoning from one sentence or paragraph or book that it may have read and apply that to a completely different setting and scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's no reason why predicting next word can't include some learnt logic, right? We've got one more weird one for you guys. So
yeah, I think another one that ties nicely into kind of this kind of spatial understanding possibly is very recently, I think it was only last week, where some researchers used GPT-4 to write the code and train this model of a robot hand. So it was a simulation of a robot, and they basically used GPT-4 to get it better and train it at spinning a pen. So I'd highly recommend if you go and like search it, because there's some cool videos of this kind of simulation of a hand that's spinning a pen like really naturally, and that was kind of all learned and trained using GPT-4. And what was really cool is like some of the parts of the code that humans were writing previously were improved upon when they used GPT-4. So there was actually a 50% average performance boost for this simulated robot being able to spin the pen. It was able to learn a lot quicker and more efficiently when the code was written and it was trained by GPT-4.
And that's kind of like a task that hasn't been done before, right? So maybe that's like new to the not in the training data.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like something that would just be like really apparent and clear from the data that GPT-4 was trained on, yeah.
Nice. Well, that's some spooky stuff just in time for Halloween this year.
Yeah, so that's kind of our quick coverage of the good side and the kind of these weird, funky, emergent abilities. So we're going to take a quick pause, do a new little segment that we're going to try out, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the bad and the ugly of ChatGPT.
So, starting a new section.
Yeah, so we're going to start this new segment, try it out, called AI Fun Facts. So, completely unrelated to the episode topic, but Riku and I are going to come each time with a fact that neither of us have heard and just, spit it out.
Okay, so mine's pretty low level,
Okay.
but so AI, if you say it as I, means love in Japanese.
Oh, very nice. And is that close to home?
It is. So I'm half Japanese, and that's where my name's from.
Cool. Mine is, probably slightly more involved than that. But during COVID-19 lockdowns in Scotland, there was a football team and they introduced this AI-powered camera system that would track the football to give people that were watching from home like the best view of the game. And there was basically a bug in the system, and when the football kept going out of bounds, so off the pitch, the camera would accidentally keep locking onto the bald head of the linesman. So the ball would go back into play, and then the camera would just like keep filming this dude's bald head.
That's really funny.
So yeah, those are our AI fun facts. And now back to the episode. Cool, so welcome back. And on the second half of this episode, we're now going to talk about some of the bad and ugly sides of ChatGPT. So obviously we've covered the positives, things that it's good at, some of the positive implications, how people are using it. And now let's get a bit dark and spooky.
Yeah, so I'm going to just talk about bias for a bit because, hopefully you guys have heard of this term before. It's kind of, big deal with GPT because, it's so widespread. And so if you just kind of Google definition of bias, it's quite hard to define. I was thinking about it and just thought, let's just Google it. So bias is often described as stereotypes about people based on a group to which they belong. So often that's like their gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and other things. And in AI models in general, so not just GPT, the kind of place to look for biases is in the data they're trained on. So I'll quickly just describe some biases that have been reported by OpenAI themselves on their training data for GPT-3. I actually couldn't find the same thing for GPT-4, but something along the lines of. So just quickly bring us back, like a lot of the data to train GPT was from the internet. So, and you often find, as this report says, the kind of the internet connected population is more representative of developed countries, wealthy, younger, and male views, and is mostly US centric. And kind of obviously a consequence of this is that, there'll be fewer women represented on the online world. So potentially these kind of discrepancies are actually in the model outputs. And that kind of ties into the next thing I want to talk about, which is this kind of some research papers highlighting the bias in the outputs. So I just want to highlight what biases OpenAI state on the data itself and compare it to kind of what's been reported in the outputs.
So yeah, I think just before you get onto that, just to really quickly at a high level emphasize why bias can be a negative thing. I think a really easy one to understand is, like we were talking about earlier, when people are using ChatGPT as like a healthcare chatbot. From what you've just said, if you've kind of got US-centric, male-centric data and therefore responses, you can imagine that if people that aren't represented by that majority are using ChatGPT to ask those sort of questions, it's definitely concerning in like a symptom diagnosis setting where, it might be inclined to respond or give you a diagnosis that's more representative of the people that make up the training data rather than the potential individual who's asking that question.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm just going to quickly summarize this paper called Revisiting the Political Biases of ChatGPT. So this paper was literally published less than a week ago, so it's very fresh. So 20th October 2023. And they cover kind of previous studies on the biases of the model from March 2023.
Mm-hmm.
They use this pretty widely used test by IDR Labs political coordinates test. So it's kind of it's free online. You can do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason they use it is because it's got translations lots of different languages.
Nice.
So I do disclaim that these results are dependent on the accuracy of that test. But they find that from the study done in March was that ChatGPT was 75% left-wing and 30% libertarian. So that's hugely left-biased.
Politically, yeah, wow.
Politically, yeah. And that's been pretty well documented. There are many, many other studies kind of showing a slight left bias, maybe not quite 75%.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few news reports as well claiming that it's left bias. So it's nice to obviously see that they've kind of done the study on this now and reassessed it more recently. Is that right?
Yeah, and using the same test, the model, as of this paper, showed 17% left bias and actually switched from libertarian to 4.9% authoritarian. So it's switched over time, which we could probably say that is maybe they did increase the training data, but maybe more to RLHF. It's not entirely clear what caused this change. So that was kind of a really high level analysis by this paper. But going a bit deeper, they gave like a really good example of what biases are, because we mentioned previously that a lot of the data training GPT was based on the English language. So this paper kind of, it's written by some Japanese authors, so they actually, they just chose arbitrarily Japanese.
Are you not a bit biased in using that paper as an example?
You know what, funny enough, I did notice the authors' names after reading the paper. So a really good example of the biases in the model was when they tested the model asking it a series of questions, you know, something like the government should provide healthcare to citizens free of charge, and then GPT would answer, you know, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, that kind
classic,
of thing.
Nice, yeah.
You would get, so if you ask that question in English, about 60% of the answers would be neutral. It would have neither agree or disagree.
Oh, interesting.
And I say 60% because you ask the question many times to get like the average response.
Okay.
Whereas if you ask it in Japanese, only about 10 to 20% would be neither agree or disagree. And then you get these kind of like much more polarized views. You get quite a lot of agree, quite a lot of disagree, and just a little bit of strongly disagree. So
that's super interesting.
It's kind of interesting how you ask the same question, different language, different response, and that is clearly a bias in the model.
Yeah, I wonder as well if that's down to the fact that obviously, you know, OpenAI is an American company that's dealing and working in the English language, so maybe they put a lot more time initially in kind of reducing some of those biases in the English language, and hopefully that's something they can come on to next in other languages.
Yes, it's very interesting. It's how this difference has come about. You know, maybe they've censored more of the English language, and it takes more time to censor stuff in other languages.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. But it's very interesting to see that, you know, depending where in the world you're using it, your kind of the type of GPT and its responses that you're getting, it could be pretty different.
Yeah, and they also found kind of similar differences when prompting I'm male, I'm female, I'm white, I'm black.
Wow.
And this paper even show that, you know, the political bias changes depending on these words. So just thought this paper really highlights kind of what bias is.
Cool. And yeah, another one, which bias is a word that's been mentioned loads in the news and obviously has very clear implications. And I think another one that is the same is the word hallucination. So this is another thing that has been cropping up a lot in the news. I think even from the start, it was a lot more apparent, and people were talking about this straight away when ChatGPT was made public, were about these hallucinations. So just to quickly describe what they are, I think one good definition, which Meta, so Facebook defined a hallucination as a confident statement that is not true. So it's basically a response that the model is given where it seems super confident, and it can even kind of argue that point, but it is not backed up by the training data, so by any factual information that's been given to it. A professor from the Uni of Pennsylvania in America actually called ChatGPT an eager-to-please intern who sometimes lies to you. And I think that's really interesting insight because, you know, I don't know if you've used it a lot or enough to realize that it never really responds to you with "I don't know."
Yeah.
It kind of always somehow responds to it, whether that kind of deflects slightly from the question you asked or answers it in a slightly different way, but it nearly always gives you a very descriptive response, and sometimes that can be factually incorrect. So yeah, you can obviously imagine that, if you're asking GPT factual things, and if you're relying on it in an educational setting, it could be quite dangerous and misleading if it's giving you these factually incorrect answers and hallucinating these points, especially if you don't know a lot about the subject that you're asking it, and you wouldn't be able to detect and realize when it's lying to you. However, on the flip side, so what's really interesting about hallucinations is that, yes, when you're talking about factual things, they're very bad. But if you're kind of getting into the more creative domains, which we now see a lot more of with kind of generating images and kind of asking GPT for these creative tasks, hallucinations can be a really good thing, because it allows the model to kind of pick and draw from different aspects of the training data and kind of make connections and give kind of novel responses that may never have been seen before in the training data. So that is how it's able to kind of give you these creative, often original responses, is because it's not just perfectly fitting the training data, so that it doesn't just give you the statistically likely next word given all of the kind of text data that it's ever seen before. It can kind of give you a new word that hasn't come next before.
So at one extreme, you just have it reproducing training data to be, in its attempt at being the most factual as possible, assuming, what's trained on is factual.
Yeah, so it's like a balancing act, I suppose, because, if it was just retrieving information from the training data, I suppose it would kind of be like Google almost. It's just kind of a search engine that plucks a piece of information that's been written or said before. But the whole idea, and why people, I think, are finding it so interesting as a tool, is because it's able to do these creative things and come up with things that haven't been necessarily said before. And sometimes that manifests itself in these hallucinations, where it's kind of communicating false information as a fact that it thinks is true. So yeah, I think it's really important to kind of be aware of that when you're using these tools, that you should kind of fact check, and especially if you're using it in education, that you need to double check what it's saying is true. So these are kind of some of the issues, bias and hallucinations that are inherent to the model and are being improved by OpenAI, but aren't really determined by the usage so much, but they are just properties of generative AI.
Wow, that's so interesting. I love the way you describe that, because at first I always thought hallucinations were a bad thing, but it kind of sounds like, you said the balancing act. It does really kind of make this, it kind of changes how you view hallucinations.
Yeah, I think they need to be managed, but yeah, I think it's part of why, it's such a cool creative tool.
Yeah.
But then just lastly to touch on, I think, before we conclude, is obviously these are some of the inherent issues with ChatGPT, but then you've also kind of got the side of it where people are misusing it or using it for negative things. So one example that here is fake news generation. So now that we have tools like ChatGPT that within seconds can generate some like new text and a story, a paragraph that has never been written before, you can imagine this kind of world that I think we're starting to come into quite rapidly, where, if people want to generate and spread a fake story, they could use generative AI to generate thousands of different variations of that same lie, that same fake news, and just send them all out there and see kind of which one sticks, which one goes viral. Even if people are seeing loads of variations of the same story, they might start to believe it's true. So, I mean, we could definitely do another episode on these kind of negative use cases and the misuse of ChatGPT, but just to give you a flavour of some of the ways which it can be negatively used.
Yeah, and ironically, a lot of studies now are actually looking at using GPT models to detect fake news. So kind of fighting fire with fire there.
Yeah, so it's fascinating where we're at even just now, and kind of what's to come. But we hope to keep you informed, and I'm sure we're going to do plenty more on these kind of societal implications and these topics of misuse and harm, and hope to keep people aware of how people are using these tools.
Yeah, I mean, and we just kind of scratched the surface with all the real world implications of GPT models, and there's loads of other large language models out there. And things like bias and hallucinations we're definitely going to come back to at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
but we've got some ideas for next episode.
Yeah, just to kind of mix things up a bit and kind of do a complete shift away from language models. Stay tuned for our next episode where we're going to be chatting about how Teslas are able to drive themselves. So self-driving cars, computer vision, so all of these topics that hopefully are new and fresh and different to language. So yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, so thanks for listening, and
Yeah,
catch you next
time.